The story of Yasios, otherwise known as Iasion, and in Latin, Yasios, goes as follows. He was a son of Zeus and Electra, also a brother of Dardanus. Others called him the son of Corythus and Electra. Some even say that Zeus got pregnant a nymph named Emera of Minos. At the wedding of his sister Harmonia, Demeter fell in love with him, and they laid in a thrice-ploughed field. The thrice-ploughed field is a figure of speech for the fall time. And the reason why, if we go to Xenophon, who tells us that 3 times a year the fields are plowed. After the 3rd time the field is plowed, that is when the fall time is coming. That is the end of the season, when agriculture starts to die. During this time of the year, Demeter, who fell in love with him, laying in a thrice-plowed field, Zeus sends down a lightning thunderbolt and kills him out of jealousy. According to Servius, Yasios is slain by Dardanus, and according to Hyginus, he was killed by his own horses, whereas others represent him as living to an advanced age as the husband of Demeter. The reason for this is simply because he comes back to life every year, and the myths of him begin to change and be adjusted to different cultures. See, Yasios is like Tammuz or Dumuzi. He is a shepherd of agriculture. He is responsible for the growing of crops, of vines, of wheat, of fruits and vegetables. He is the embodiment of the growing of produce. Just like Dumuzi, Demeter, often identified with Isis and Ishtar, plays the same role here. She falls in love with him. He gets sent down to the underworld, and she weeps over him, just as Ishtar weeps for Dumuzi, just as Isis weeps over Osiris. Yasios is the Greek representation of the shepherd of agriculture. He is credited for finding the Samothracian Mysteries. The Samothracian Mysteries also have a primordial god named Adama. Eustathius says that Iasion, being inspired by Demeter, traveled to Sicily and many other countries and taught the mysteries of Demeter all throughout the world. He's even credited for going to Phrygia and finding a priesthood for Kybele. In some versions of the myth, it's not Demeter who he falls in love with, it's Kybele. Now, this makes some people think that he might be a Greek version of Attis. Attis being in Turkey, Yasios being in the island of Samothrace. In the Phrygian mysteries, Attis is the one who finds the mysteries. He's the one who finds the priesthood for Kybele. Kybele, who's known as Rhea to the Greeks, is the one who falls in love with Iasion. And they start the mysteries of the Great Mother in northern Greece, in Macedonia and Samothrace. We even have Yasios being told in the myths of Crete, the Idaean dactylus, the fingers of the great Zeus, whereas Yasios is one of these sons of Zeus. He is one of the dactylian fingers. Homer's Odyssey mentions this god in Book 5. He says, Hermes commands Calypso to release Odysseus. Calypso shuddered, and her words came forth in rapid flight. You are merciless, you god, resentful beyond all beings. You are jealous if without disguise a goddess makes a man her bedfellow, her beloved husband. So it was with Demeter of the braided tresses, followed her heart, and lay in love with Iasion in the triple furrowed field. Zeus was aware of it soon enough and hurled the bright thunderbolt and killed him. Now, what does this tell us? This is in the 8th century BCE. This tells us that this is one of the oldest myths told before Homer. Hesiod and Theogony, one of the oldest surviving myths in the world that's passed down from the Hittites, passed down from the Sumerians, says that Demeter, bright goddess, was joined in sweet love with the hero Iasion in a thrice-ploughed fallow in the rich land of Crete, and they bore Plutos, meaning wealth, a kindly god who goes everywhere over the land and the seas wide back, and him who finds him, into whose hands he comes, he makes rich, bestowing great wealth upon him. Now, as far as theology goes, there's a reason for this. You see, when you have Demeter, who is the goddess of crops and agriculture and fertility, and when you have fertility falling in love with the shepherd of the crops, the shepherd of agriculture, and you have water mixed with seed, and you have a growing of abundance, you get wealth, Pluto. So Demeter lying with Iasion brings wealth. This sort of myth is what comes from the myths of Demutsi and Ishtar from the Sumerians. The Babylonians passed these down to other cultures, and it was retold in different languages and different cultures throughout many, many, many years. The Phoenicians named Eshmun is the lord of healing. See, in the myth of Eshmun, whose name means the eighth, or it's also a pun, Shmun by itself means oil. Oil being what a healer uses to heal. Eshmun, in his myth, falls in love with Astarte. And Eshmun plays the role of the young and beautiful god, just like Adonis and Attis. Now, Eshmun, like Attis, castrates himself, bleeds out, and dies. And upon this, Astarte, who weeps for him, brings him up into the heavens and sends him back down as a healer, where he is known to be the Asclepius of Beirut by some Neoplatonist writers. This myth also being very similar to Adonis, who is worshipped on the island of Cyprus. Venus falls in love with Adonis in a similar fashion. Venus tells Adonis, who is a hunter, a young, beautiful hunter, not to go and hunt because he might die. She tells him a story about Kybele. She warned Adonis, "Have been of any use to fear those beasts. Be brave. When backs are turned, but when they're bold, boldness is dangerous. Never be rash, my darling. To my risk, never provoke. Quarry that nature's armed, lest your renown should cost me dear. Not youth, not beauty, nor charms that move Venus's heart can ever move lions or bristly boars, or eyes or minds of savage beasts. In his curved tusk a boar wields lightning." It's interesting that Ovid uses this word, wields lightning, because this is exactly how Yasios dies. Tawny lions launch their charge in giant anger. Creatures of that kind I hate. And when Adonis asked her why, "I'll tell," she said, "a tale to astonish you of ancient guilt and magic long ago." Did I not deserve a special thanks and my incense in my honor? But he forgot. He gave no thanks and burnt no incense. Then to sudden wrath I turned, stung by scorn, and lest I be despised in days to come, I set my heart against them both, to warn the world by their example. A temple stands hidden in shady woods, which once Iasion, to fulfill a vow, had raised to the great mother of the gods. There they journeyed and were glad to rest, and their ill-timed, importunate desire, roused by my power, possessed Hippomenes. Beside the temple was a dim-lit grotto, a gloomy cavern roofed with natural rock, an ancient holy shrine filled by the priests with wooden statues of the gods of old. He entered here and with forbidden sin defiled the sanctuary. The holy statues turned their shocked eyes away, and Kybele, the tower-crowned mother, pondered should she plunge the guilty pair beneath the waves of Styx. Such punishment seemed light. Therefore, their necks, so smooth before, she clothed with tawny manes. Their fingers curved to claws. Their arms were changed to legs. Their chests swelled with new weight, with tails. They swept the sandy ground, and in their eyes cruel anger blazed, and growls they gave for speech. Their marriage bed is now a woodland lair, and feared by men, but the goddess tamed. They champ 2 lions, the bits of Kybele. And you, my darling, for my sake beware of lions, and of every savage beast that shows not heels but teeth. Avoid them all, lest by your daring ruin on us fall. So Venus tells Adonis about beasts and how to be aware of them and to fear them and not to hunt them. And as she leaves, what does he go and do? He grabs his bow and goes out hunting. And immediately, a boar comes up and bites him, and he starts to bleed out, and he's dying. And he screams for help, and Venus hears him while she's on her chariot, being driven away by swans in the air. And she hears his cry, and she comes back, and he's bleeding out and dying. And this bleeding out and dying is captured across all of these myths. The death of Tammuz, the death of Osiris, the death of Attis, who's bleeding out from castration, the death of Eshmun, who's bleeding out of castration, the death of Yasios, who's been struck by the bolt of Zeus, and the mourning of these gods, the mourning, the weeping for Tammuz, like we see here in this book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 8:14 says, "Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord. And I saw women there, sitting there, mourning, weeping for Tammuz. Son of man," he said to me, "do you see this? You will see even greater abominations as these." And what they're talking about in this verse is the one and only weeping of the dead god, the mysteries of the agricultural shepherd who dies every year in the fall and rises up every year at the spring equinox. The weeping of the god. Apollo weeps for Hyacinth when he is struck by the frisbee. And this weeping is what happens at the end of the 3rd season, the 3rd plowed field, the fall time, the season that we're in right now, the month of October, when the fields, when the trees, when the leaves start to turn color. This is the fall time myth. This is the dying of the agriculture, the dying of the shepherd, the dying of Demeter. And as we see here with Adonis, who's bleeding out and dying, Adonis dying groans, and thither turned her snowy birds, when from heaven on high she saw him lifeless, writhing in his blood. She rent her garments, tore her lovely hair, and bitterly beat her breast, and springing down, reproached the fates. Even so, not everything shall own your sway. Memorials of my sorrow, Adonis, shall endure each passing year. Your death, repeated in the hearts of men, shall reenact my grief and my lament. But now your blood shall change into a flower. Persephone of old was given grace to change a woman's form to fragrant mint. And shall I then be grudged to the right to change my prince? And with these words she sprinkled nectar, sweet-scented, on his blood, which at the touch swelled up as a pond. When showers fall, clear bubbles form, and an hour had passed, a blood-red flower arose, like the rich bloom of pomegranates, which is a stubborn rind, conceal their seeds, yet it is beauty brief. So lightly cling its petals, fall so soon, when the winds blow that give the flower its name. Now this flower growing from the blood and the tears is what we see with Attis. When Attis is killed, Kybele cries, and her tears mixed with the blood raises up a flower. And with Adonis, every year, and with Eshmun as well, there is a river in Phoenicia that turned red every year, and they believe that this was the blood of Adonis or Eshmun. The myth is apparent in the myth of Yasios. Yasios is dying in the fall time every year. He lays with Demeter, who loves him, and he dies every year. He's brought up again in the text of Ovid as he's starting to become an old man and get white hairs, and Demeter complains about this. Ovid is smart and understands that these myths are connected, so he puts them all in the same book, in book 10, right before the death of Orpheus. Orpheus is another version of the going down into Hades and coming back up again, of losing the loved one. And the reason why it's always love that is the common denominator between all of these myths. It's always a goddess loving a god, or a god loving his lover, like Orpheus. And what keeps them eternal, what gives them eternal life, is the love that their lover has for them. Their memories of them while they're in Hades is what brings them back up into the world every year, which is what rises the dead, the people who love them, their memories. And the springtime comes around, the myth is retold. With Dumuzi, he has to work out a deal. Well, he has to spend 6 months of the year down in the underworld and 6 months of the year up the world. The case of Adonis, he has to make a deal where he stays in Hades for 6 months of the year, while Persephone spends the other 6 months in the underworld because she took a bite of the pomegranate. See, these are the mysteries. This is what's central to the mystery religion. The death of a god and the seasons of the year. When the initiates would take part in these rites, they would get eternal life because they are a part of the world and nature. This all goes back to Sumeria. Dumuzi was taken captive in Uruk. He will no longer bathe in Eridu. He will no longer soap himself at the holy shrine. He will no longer perform his sweet task among the maidens of the city. See, Dumuzi was taken by demons and killed, and ripped apart, just as Zagreus, who's called the first Dionysus. He was a great, beautiful hunter who paired with Gaia, who was in love with him. He is ripped apart by the Titans and killed and brought down to Hades, where he stays there for quite a bit, and then is brought back and raised as a son of Semele, and he comes back as a second coming, where he's the god of wine and Bacchic revelry. But This goes back, like I said, to Tammuz. And the myth of Tammuz, it says, the ewe gives up her lamb, the goat gives up her kid. My heart plays the reed pipe of mourning. I would go to him, I would see my child. The mother walked to the desolate place. Surtur walked to where Dumuzi lay. She looked at the slain wild bull. She looked at his face. She said, my child, the face is yours, the spirit has fled. There is mourning in the house. There is grief in the inner chambers. This is the weeping for Tammuz. This is the weeping for Christ. This is Isis weeping for Osiris. Then it says, my beloved has been taken from the city. O you flies of the steppe, my beloved bridegroom has been taken from me. Before I can wrap him with the proper shroud, I asked the hills and valleys, where is my husband? I can no longer bring him food. I can no longer serve him drink. The jackal lies down on his bed. The raven dwells in his sheepfold. You asked me about his reed pipe? The wind must play it for him. You asked me about his sweet songs? The wind must for them. Ishtar is weeping for Tammuz. And we see this in Egypt because Osiris is slain by Set. And she weeps for him and can't find him and has to go and find him. This is the death of agriculture. This is the myth of the fall time that we are in right now. Crops are dying. Will they return? Nobody knows. We have to wait. We have to wait till springtime. This is what's been told. We have to pray for our salvation. We have to pray to the gods that they will give us back our crops. Plutos is wealth. How are we going to get more wealth? We need Yasios to come back. Yasios needs to come back and lay with Demeter because they are going to give birth to Plutos again. This is the repetitive cycle of the dying and rising agricultural god. And this is who Yasios is. By the way, according to some, Yasios, who with the agricultural hero Triptolemos, were afterwards placed among the stars and are known as the heavenly twins Gemini. Eshmun is called the eighth son of Siddiq. Siddiq had 7 sons before him who are known as the Kybele. Now the Kybele are often equated with the Idaean dactyls. The Idaean dactyls claim that Yasios is one of them as well, which means we have a direct connection with Yasios and Eshmun. There is no secret here that these myths are being retold in different parts of the world by different cultures, but there is a thread that goes across these gods: Attis, Eshmun, Adonis, Yasios, Osiris, Mithra. And the question is, how much of this influences Christian theology? Does it mean that there was no Jesus? No, it doesn't mean that at all. What I think is going on here, once Jesus is dead and people are mourning for Jesus, they're going to look around at other sacred measures of weeping for somebody important. And the weeping for the dead God is what is prevalent in all these other myths, especially if he died and he is the Messiah. How do we get salvation? We get salvation springtime, the Easter time. From the winter solstice, December 25th, up until the middle of July, is the ultimate time of a rising of a divine child who's known as the Lord of Green Pastures and Shepherd. See, this is where we enter into Mithra. Mithra is said to be born on December 25th, or at least around the time of the winter solstice. The mysteries of Mithra are the oldest and most ancient of all the mystery religions. All the mystery religions are influenced by Mithra, the Mithraic order of the Persians, and the Persians ran the world. And it wasn't until Alexander the Great when the shift of power turned to the west. But what did stand and stay was the mysteries, and Mithraic mysteries were the oldest. When Pompey the Great conquered the Parthians, many temples of Mithra were built in the Roman Empire, and these would be converted to Christian temples later on. Underneath one of these temples in Rome is what we have the Mithra's liturgy, and it says, "On the seventh day, pick up the scarab and bury it with myrrh and wine from Mendes and fine linen, and put it away in a flourishing bean field. Then, after you have entertained and feasted together, put away in a pure manner the ointment for the immortalization. If you want to show this to someone else, take the juice of the herb called kentrus and smear it along with rose oil over the eyes of one you wish, and he will see so clearly that he will amaze you. I have not found a greater spell than this in the world. Ask the god for what you want, and he will give it to you." That presentation before the great god is like doing this: obtaining the above-mentioned herb kentritus at the conjunction, the sun and the moon occurring in the lion. Take the juice, after mixing it with honey and myrrh, write on the leaf of the persea tree the 8-letter formula, as is mentioned below, and keeping yourself pure for 3 days. Before, set out early in the morning toward the east. Lick off the leaf while you should show it to the sun. Then the god Helios will listen to you attentively. Begin to consecrate this divine new moon in the lion. This is the formula: I-E-O-I-A-I. Lick this up so that you may be protected. Rolling up the leaf, throw it in the rose oil. Many times have I used the spell and have wondered greatly. But Mithra said to me, "Use the ointment no longer, but after casting it into the river, you must consult while wearing the great mystery of the scarab, revitalized through the 25 living birds, and consult once a month at full moon instead of 3 times a year." Now, what's interesting about this is you see, first of all, the 3-day motif present in the mysteries of Attis. After the Day of Blood on March 25th every year, there's a 3-day festival leading until the Day of Washing on March 27th. Ishtar descends into the underworld during the spring equinox, which to the Babylonians was the first month of the year. She was down there for 3 days, as it says in the text in cuneiform. After the 3rd day, she rises up with Dumuzi, and the dead are raised up with them. In the case of the Mithraic order, it talks about the divine new moon after the 3rd time of the year. The 3rd time of the year, as we saw with Yasios, being the thrice-ploughed field. Once again, the year being divided up into quarters. The 3rd quarter is when the death occurs. 9 months from this 3rd quarter is when you get the birth of the god, after a pregnancy of 9 months from the time of the winter solstice, December 25th. This is why Mithra is born on December 25th. Now, this is not going to be controversial for a Christian, because Christians know that Jesus wasn't actually born on December 25th. They just celebrated his birthday on December 25th because at the time when Constantine was emperor, there was two major religions, Sol Invictus, which is the Roman Mithraic Mysteries, and Christianity. And to merge these together, they would celebrate Christmas at the same time. Even early Christians saw the same similarities and symbolism throughout these cultures. And one of the early church fathers, very famous preacher known as the Nicene preacher, had a hymn that was purposed for Attis. And according to Hippolytus and Irenaeus, the Nicene preacher repurposed this hymn for Jesus. And it goes like this: Blessed one, whether born of Kronos, Zeus or Rhea, I loudly hail thee, Jesus. You the Assyrians call thrice-desired Adonis. All Egypt calls you Osiris. Samothracians call you Adamas. The Phrygians Pappus, a corpse, a god, unfruitful goat herd, green ear of the harvested grain, fruitful almond born, player of the pipes, Pan. The hymn to Attis that was prevalent throughout the mystery religions was being repurposed for Jesus because the early Christians knew very well that this was a movement that had commonalities among other mystery religions. The first Gospel of Mark was very secretive mystery religion, the baptism of initiation, apotheosis, and the Orphic idea of eternal life through a life of piety. These ideas are all throughout the Orphic tradition. Clement of Alexandria speaks on this, actually. He says, an ancient, early Christian critique of the pagan mysteries. A curse then upon the man started this deception for mankind, whether it be Dardanos, who introduced the Mysteria for the Meter Theon, mother of the gods, or Yasios, who founded the Samothracian orgies and rites. And he says that it was a demon who created these rites to confuse people because they're so similar to Jesus. That is telling you something right there. That is from Exhortation to the Greeks, Book 2. Go check it out yourself. Clement of Alexandria. To finish this off, who is Yasios? Well, Yasios is perhaps equated with Attis, the dying consort of the Phrygian Kybele. And in his case, it's Demeter's consort on the island of Crete. Also, Rhea's consort on the island of Samothrace. Hesiod appears to equate the two when he places Yasios in Crete. The meaning of the name Yasios is obscure, but it may be connected with bindweed. The bindweed is a special kind of flower. It's often depicted with vines wrapped around it. In a similar fashion is the rod of Asclepius wrapped around with two serpents. See, this is what is depicted with Yasios, because he's not exactly a healer like Asclepius, but he is a healer in the sense that he brings crops to the world when there's dying, when there's need of abundance. So the white flowering vine, commonly found in the wheat fields entwined with grain-stalks, represent what the word Iasion actually means in Greek. It also can mean healer. The name Jason by itself means healer in Greek. So his name, just like Eshmun, is a sort of pun, Eshmun being eighth and oil, Iasion meaning bindweed and healer. And they both have this sense of bringing salvation to a world that just finished wintertime. And every year, just like Adonis has his deal with the devil, where he has to go down to the underworld for 6 months, just like Tamos has to go down in the underworld for 6 months. This same applies to Yasios. You have attained true gnosis.